She had no passion or interest in helping women or children, so it was a complete shock in 2003 when Susan Binkley founded a Christian residential recovery program for women and their children overcoming abuse and addiction. So, how did that happen? She's here today to share her surprising story. Susan, it's so great to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
And I love the fact that you started something like this with literally no passion. So how did that happen?
Oh, well, it's crazy because I often say that God healed me of the fact that I really didn't like women and children. And so it all started with an incredible, powerful dream I had one night. And I would really say that I was just minding my own business. And one night I had this incredible dream where in the dream, there was a huge book that was placed in front of me, and I was required to read every page of the book. And the book was basically a business plan of how you would put something like Blue Monarch together. And it described in great detail how you would run it, how you would put it together, how you would solve problems. It even described how the women would be employed by producing a product. And so when I woke up the next morning, I knew that it was a powerful dream, but I made jokes about how I had clearly intercepted someone else's dream because it had nothing to do with me. It was all about helping women and children. I found groups of women to be annoying, and I only liked my one child. So I couldn't imagine how it had anything to do with me. But over a few years period of time, it really ended up falling into place exactly like the dream. And so here, this is our 22nd year, and I'm happy to say that we have never, ever ventured from the plan that was in the book.
Wow.
And I really feel like God has blessed us for that.
Now, I know you cried for 3 days
Yeah.
when you realized, like, I have to actually do this. This is me. And part of that was just feeling like I'm unqualified. I don't have any experience. How did you overcome that feeling of, I'm not enough, God, for what you're asking me to do?
Well, I call it my 3 days in the belly of the fish because I cried about it. And first of all, I thought it was a really bad sign if God had gotten around to asking me, because I thought that must mean that a whole lot of qualified people said no, and that's a bad sign. And it also didn't fit within my plan, because even growing up in the church as a child, I had it all figured out that if I could just live a good life but not make eye contact with God, then I would be good. Because if you made eye contact with God, He might send you to Africa as a missionary or something. And I didn't want to do that. And so it really just shocked me, like, how did this happen? How did He notice me? And I didn't feel qualified at all. And so I struggled with it, and I knew that it was going to be a huge undertaking. And I didn't feel like I had what it took to do it. And it was really something that my 17-year-old daughter said at the time that changed everything, because she said, Mommy, you can tell God no, and He won't love you any less than if you say yes. And that was a game changer for me, because when she said that, I thought, how can I say no to a God like that? So I told Him, okay, I'm going to do this, but on one condition, that I never, ever have to speak in public. And so...
And how long was it before you had to speak in public?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay, good.
So that didn't work out.
I love the fact, too, because when you say that you were struggling with that feeling of being unqualified, it wasn't just about, like, I don't have skills running a ministry or I don't know how to deal with addiction. It was that you felt your own life wasn't qualified. Like, you were on your third marriage. You hadn't really been attending church. And, I think about that. I love that, because what does that tell you about who God is? The fact that He wasn't judging you by these external things, but He was looking at your heart.
Well, I really think it's such a great example of how God can use just ordinary and even reluctant people to do His work. And, when I have gone around speaking to different groups, one of the things that has always really hurt my heart is that there have been so many people who have come up to me afterwards with tears in their eyes, and not necessarily about something that I shared, but because they felt like God had asked them to do something and they had been resistant. And you can see the regret that they have. I mean, it must be painful for them. And so I think that it's just a great example that you don't really have to have really great qualifications for God to use you.
Now, what did you learn about dependence on God? Because I think this is something now that you even teach your staff when they feel overwhelmed or like there's so much to do or there's this problem is so insurmountable. What do you tell them?
Well, I really feel like I remember the first day that I walked into the property that we had, and I had just signed a $1 million note, which just was like, oh my goodness, what in the world have I done? And I walked in and I looked at that empty property and I got this wave of, oh my gosh, what am I going to do about this? And in that moment, God really reminded me, this is my plan, not yours. And so every time that I have gotten overwhelmed or frightened over the enormity of the responsibility, I have to remind myself, this is really God's plan. So I need to step aside and just let him do his work. But also, I guess it was in 2012, I think, is when I took a sabbatical because I was so burned out. The work that we do, and anyone who does any kind of similar work, it is exhausting and it's heartbreaking. It's very difficult. And having had no training whatsoever, I was completely burned out. And so I remember I took a sabbatical. I'm walking on the beach with my favorite dog, and I was praying, like, what can I do to get my passion back? And what can I do to protect my staff from feeling burned out like I am? And just as clear as day, God said, your job is to serve, not fix, and to love, not judge. And in that moment, I realized, well, that right there is why I'm so exhausted, because I've been starting every day wanting to fix people, which means because I can't fix people, then by the end of the day, every single day, I feel like I have failed. And so we completely shifted the way we look at what we do now, because we can serve, and we can serve well, and we can always love more. And so every time that anyone on our staff or we find that a situation is just completely sucking the life out of us, then we'll stop and reevaluate and think, wait a minute, are we trying to fix or are we trying to serve? And that usually puts everything back into perspective. And I've never gotten burned out again, and no one on my staff has either.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. What a great lesson. And, just to give people a sense of all that Blue Monarch is, can you just give us a sense of what it is today now, 22 years later?
Oh, well, we are a long-term residential recovery program for women and their children. And most of the women come out of jail when they come to us, and they have most likely lost custody of their children. And so a whole lot of what we do, there are a couple of things that kind of set us apart. We focus a whole lot on the child's recovery as much as we do the moms, because they have been through a lot. And then we also help mothers learn how to parent sober, because so many of the moms that we serve have never parented their children without using drugs as a way to cope. And they grew up in a home where they never observed healthy parenting. And so those two things, I think, are part of what has really made our program so hugely successful in not just changing the circumstances for that family, but impacting the family tree as well.
I love that. And I know it's in your book, From My Front Row Seat, amazing story and stories of the work that you do. You said over 350 children have been reunited with their families through the ministry. Is that right?
Yeah, well, actually, it's over 360 children now have been reunited with their moms who had lost custody.
Absolutely amazing. And, we see, of course, the opioid epidemic here in Canada as well. Mm-hmm. It's just huge. It's impacting so many people watching. And I know it's complex, but do you have hope that people can have a brand new life that can really get free from the grip of this?
Well, I think it's a shame that a lot of times addiction is looked at as a permanent lifetime condition, like a curse for life. And we do not see that. We see people who can actually heal from their addiction and find not just sobriety, but freedom. And that's what we really wish that people could grasp, because you don't have to live like that the rest of your life. And we see women find freedom to the point where you could put their drug of choice in front of them and they would not even be the least bit tempted. Wow. And that to me is, that's healing, and only Jesus can do that.
And that is the ingredient, I know, that makes a difference in so many people's lives. And, you know, I know there's some people watching right now who have someone they love, a family member, a spouse, a child trapped in the grip of addiction. What advice would you give them as they're trying to wrestle that out? Because you know it's messy, you know it's complicated. It's no straight line, there's no perfect thing to do, but what would you tell them?
Well, this is hard advice for especially parents to hear, because a lot of times I compare it to, like, if you come face to face with a shark, they tell you to stay still, don't move. Well, that goes against all your instincts. And what we have seen is that the women who have had the greatest results in finding complete healing and freedom are the ones who hit rock bottom, and that their families allowed them to do that.
Wow.
And that's a tough thing to hear. And it's a really hard thing to make yourself do when you care about that person so much. But honestly, the ones that I love to see show up at our door are the ones who have lost everything and everyone, because those are the ones who will be so desperate that they will finally make a change. Because if you don't need to make a change, you probably won't make a change. And as long as there's someone to bail them out every single time, not necessarily literally, but to always pick up the pieces, they know that. And I got all the women together one time, and I asked them, I said, is this really true? You know, help me understand this, because so many people want to help someone, and we try to stop them from helping too much. And their answer was, please do not love us to death.
Wow, that's so powerful. We could talk on and on and on. There's so much inspiration in this book. From my front row seat, a collection of stories from my time working alongside women in recovery. Susan Binkley, thanks for being faithful to respond to that call that you didn't think you could do. And now 22 years later, and I'm so glad you decided to public speak, because you're a great communicator. So it's amazing what God can do, and you give him the pen for your story of your life.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me.
And hey, if you're watching this and you have a family member struggling with addiction, if you yourself are struggling with addiction, we would love to pray with you. When God enters the scene, you never know what's possible. It may not happen as fast as we hope, but hope is there and possibility is there when we use the resources of heaven to address the problems of earth. Give us a call, 1-866-273-4444, or send us an email at prayer@crossroads.ca. We would love to pray with you and be part of your journey.